Hello everyone, welcome to Lucid Mains. Today we are going to deal with the Me Too movement which is going the rounds in India. So before going into the details of the movement, let's go to the background of the movement. The movement began with a New York Times investigation report last year regarding the sexual misconduct done by Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein towards his women colleagues. After the initial revelations, several other women working in Hollywood came out against Harvey Weinstein. In India, the movement began with the crowdsourced list of 50 academics by a student named Raya Sarkar. The academics in the list were those accused by students of sexual misconduct towards them. And the movement got further pace with actor Tanushree Dutta's allegations against fellow actor Nana Patekar. So, what is the need for Me Too movement? In India, patriarchy is so deep-rooted. Due to this, women in India always find themselves getting restrained by the chains set on them by the patriarchal society. This is evident from the following fact. In India, 1 in 5 teenage girls is no longer in school, 1 in 2 is anemic, and many lack sanitation facilities. These three facts is a practical example of hardships suffered by Indian women. Further, a recent World Bank-led study points out that in India, girls are taught to erase their personhood and to be dependent on men. An ESSER report highlights that Indian girls tend to internalize the society's low estimate of them. As we have mentioned about ESSER report, we will just go through what ESSER stands for. ESSER stands for Annual Status of Education Report conducted by an NGO, Pratham. This is an annual survey that aims to provide reliable estimates of children's enrollment and basic learning levels for each district and state in India. The Me Too movement does not try to address the root of the problem faced by women in India, but in one way or other, it is a movement against patriarchy. The movement is a cry for change for the better. The movement aims to bring about a working environment which is safe for women to work and which grants equality for women, which is free of gender discrimination. This movement is against the normalization of sexual harassment as a price that women must pay for having a professional career. As I have said earlier, the movement is aimed at ensuring equality and gender parity in all aspects of life and especially in workplaces. In short, the movement represents a paradigm shift in the way a new generation of women conceives of feminist struggle. So, now we will see some of the positives of the movement. The movement has generated a public conversation about a gamut of transgressions by men. This was something of an impossible thing in the past, but with more and more women coming out in open against sexual violations done to them by their superiors or colleagues, the movement has gathered pace and it has brought into public discourse the sexual violations done by men in power towards their female colleagues. With the movement, the lonely and individual struggles have now become part of a collective movement. This gives the collective strength for the struggles of women. The movement has redrawn the lines of what is acceptable workplace behavior on part of men, especially men in position of power over women. After the revelations as part of Me Too movement, certain industries which had no sexual harassment policy or redress mechanisms are now being forced to set up committees to check sexual harassment. This is a very bright takeaway of the movement. The movement has also brought to light several acts of gender discrimination which ranged from outright violence to casual sexism, mainly at workplaces. The movement has sent a warning signal to those who prey on women that from now on, women will not remain silent anymore. Since we have talked about the positives of the movement, we shall also go through some of the negatives of the movement. The movement basically aims at public naming and shaming of sexual predators. But in public naming and shaming, there is the danger of settling personal scores. The media trial and public outcry robs the accused a chance to be heard. This poses an ethical dilemma. There has already been allegations of blackmailing and extortions on part of women. Serious matters like implementing the institutional mechanisms put forward by Vishakha Guidelines and other legislative enactments are not getting enough attention in the din made by the public naming and shaming of Me Too movement. One of the biggest drawback of this movement is that it remains limited to the elite circles of society. And the most unfortunate thing about the movement was that it had to face criticism from sections of women too. They have accused the movement as something of a witch hunt or as a manifestation of mob justice. The movement also runs the danger of employers becoming apprehensive of employing women or male colleagues being wary of engaging with their female counterparts. This could prove counterproductive to the objectives of the movement. Apart from the negatives mentioned, there are some inherent fault lines in this movement. The major problem with this movement is the timing of the events which are being exposed now. Most of the revelations related to events which happened years back. Due to this, it is difficult to prove these allegations as there won't be much evidence in support to these allegations. Then another most important problem with this movement is the absence of men in support to India's Me Too movement. This could make the issue of sexual harassment at workplace a women's issue. And American activist Jackson Coates says that calling gender violence a women's issue is in itself part of the problem. So the Me Too movement in India has to take care of this. Since we have talked about the absence of men in India's Me Too movement, we shall see what sort of a role men can do in Me Too movement. Representatives of Forum to Engage Men, a civil society alliance working across India, say that it is important for men to take the next step after the heightened awareness of Me Too in India. Men can acknowledge and take responsibility for the pervasive violence, reflect on their own behaviors, and break the male code of being silent bystanders. They can take an active role on the issues of gender discrimination. That is, they can take an active role in discussing various dimensions of gender discrimination, be it wage gap issues or be it casual sexism. Pro-feminist men's groups are also pointing out that it is important to quickly build support and understanding among men with respect to Me Too in order to prevent fodder being given to the men's rights movements that is gaining ground. Already, we have seen instances of men's rights movements in North America campaigning against the Me Too movement which had originated in America in connection with Harvey Weinstein episode. Now, we will see what the path the movement should follow in the coming days. If the movement has to sustain and if it means to bring about a lasting solution to the problems faced by women, then the movement has to spread to regional media, startup sector, unorganized sector, etc., where women always find themselves in an unfavorable position. Rather than getting limited to the elite circles, the movement in India has to question the erasure of Dalit, Bahujan, Adivasi women's narratives. Then only will the movement can be called a women's movement. In the present scenario, the movement is limited to the elite circles of the society, and the movement must reform the existing system to make it more receptive towards the problems faced by women and towards those instances or forms of sexual violence which do not fit into the normal discourse of sexual violence towards women. And most importantly, the movement should bring more men to its fold. It will give the movement a credibility which it lacks now. And women will have to delineate, for example, a censure for non-performance from sexual harassment. If not, then it will be undermining the very objectives and very principles of Me Too movement. Now, as we have talked about sexual violence against women with regard to Me Too movement, we will see what India's performance is in terms of handling sexual violence against women. Despite laws like the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplaces Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act and guidelines like Vishakha Guidelines, sexual violence towards women is rampant in India. Only around 30% of total cases of sexual violence are reported in India. Still, it amounts to 75 cases per day. The figures mentioned are from 2016 data. So, as we have mentioned that only around 30% of total cases of sexual violence are reported in India, it means that the actual number of sexual violence could be around 275 cases per day. Now that's a very shocking number, which is totally unacceptable for a modern democratic society like ours. Much more shocking is the report in Mint, which says that almost 99% of sexual violence against women go unreported in India. That means the cases which are in the media or are in the reports is just the tip of an iceberg. And one another thing about India's law and order system is that police gives low priority to complaints of sexual harassment at workplaces and in general. This is because sexual harassment is classed by government under the broad category of assault on women to outrage her modesty. And the official category of violence against women include acid attacks, death due to forced abortion attempts, death due to abortions, cruelty to women by husband, etc. So, sexual harassment at workplaces runs the risk of getting low priority in police stations. This makes implementation of the acts and justice to victims a slow and tardy process. Now, we will go through the data given by Women and Child Development Ministry. From the column, we can say that the number of cases of sexual violence in India from the years 2050 till 27th July 2018 remains almost the same per year. As we can see, there were 522 such cases in 2015, 539 in 2016, 570 in 2017 and 533 till July 27, 2018. The number of 2018 tells us that the year may show the maximum number of cases of sexual violence in the past 4 years. Now, this shows that despite several legislative measures and guidelines, the curse of sexual violence still remains rampant in India. Now we will go through the states with most cases. You can say that Uttar Pradesh tops the list, followed by Delhi. Earlier we had mentioned about Vishakha Guidelines. So now we will see what these guidelines are. It is a set of procedural guidelines for use in India in cases of sexual harassment. These guidelines were the result of Supreme Court verdict in the Vishakha versus State of Rajasthan. The case pertained to the matter of a Rajasthan state government employee, Banwari Devi. She was employed in the Women Development Program of Rajasthan in the late 1990s. As part of her duty, she had campaigned against child marriage in her village. This enraged the landlords of the village, and as a revenge and as a method to teach her a lesson, these landlords repeatedly raped Banwari Devi, and she didn't get justice from Rajasthan High Court. Enraged at this, Vishakha, an NGO, filed a PIL in the Supreme Court, and in its verdict, the Supreme Court issued certain guidelines which are legally binding. The Vishakha Guidelines, as they are known now, defined sexual harassment and imposed 3 key obligations on institutions, which are prohibition, prevention and redress. Supreme Court also directed all employers to establish a complaints committee to look into matters of sexual harassment of women at workplace. Now, we will go through the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention and Redressal Act. The Act was passed in 2013. It defines sexual harassment, lays down the procedures for a complaint and inquiry, and the action to be taken. In fact, the Act broadens the Vishakha Guidelines. We had mentioned that the Acts define sexual harassment. Now we will see what are the dimensions included in the definition of sexual harassment. It includes physical contact and advances, a demand or request for sexual favors, sexually colored remarks, showing pornography, and any other unwelcome physical, verbal or non-verbal contact of sexual nature. Additionally, the Act mentions 5 circumstances that amount to sexual harassment. It includes implied or explicit promise of preferential treatment in employment, implied or explicit threat of detrimental treatment, implied or explicit threat about present or future employment status, interference with work or creating an offensive or hostile work environment, and humiliating treatment likely to affect health or safety of the women employee. The Act mandates every employer to constitute an internal complaints committee at each office or branch with 10 or more employees. It lays down procedures and defines various aspects of sexual harassment. The rights of all women working or visiting a workplace in any capacity are protected under this Act. It is not necessary for the victim herself to make a complaint in writing. If circumstances demand, a member of ICC, that is Internal Complaints Committee, or the legal heir of the victim could make the complaint in writing to the ICC. The Act says that the complaint has to be made within 3 months from the date of the last incident. But in this matter also, extension could be allowed as per circumstances. Now we will go through the procedure of Internal Complaints Committee. Section 10 of the Act deals with conciliation. That is, before inquiry, the ICC may, at the request of the aggrieved women, take steps to settle the matter through conciliation. However, no monetary settlement will be permitted. The ICC may forward the complaint to the police. Otherwise, the ICC can start an inquiry that has to be completed within 90 days. The Internal Complaints Committee or ICC has similar powers to those of a civil court in respect of following matters. 1. Summoning or examining any person on oath. 2. Requiring the discovery and production of documents. After the inquiry, the Internal Complaints Committee must file a report to the employer within 10 days. A copy of this is to be made available to both the parties concerned. And secrecy of the complainant, the evidences, witnesses and the procedures etc. will be maintained. After the recommendations, the aggrieved women or respondent may approach the court in 90 days. In case the complaint is false, the ICC may recommend the employer to take disciplinary action against the complainant as per service rules. Section 14 of the Act deals with punishment for malicious complaints. And now we will go through some of the suggestions to improve the efficiency of the Act. The guidelines of the Act must be disseminated among the employees. The guidelines and the organization's policy on sexual harassment must be displayed in locations which could be easily seen by all the employees. Companies and organizations need to adopt a zero tolerance policy towards sexual harassment at workplace. Then, skill development and capacity building programs could be conducted for members of ICC. So that's the end of this session. I hope everyone has got an idea about the Me Too movement and also about Vishakha Guidelines as well as Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplaces Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2013. Thank you.